Danse, bonjour, hello, good morning. My name is Natalie Kermoal. I'm a professor as well as the director of the Rupertsland Center for Métis Research. And first of all, I'd like to welcome you to the live stream format of the Spring 2022 Métis Talks. I'd like to first acknowledge that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory, traditional gathering place for Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. So for those of you who don't know what we do in the Rupertsland Center for Métis Research, we are a joint venture between the Métis Nation of Alberta, the Rupertsland Institute, the Faculty of Native Studies, and the University of Alberta. We are housed in the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta, and we're mainly an academic research program specifically geared towards Métis issues. At this point, I would like to acknowledge and congratulate Lorne Gladue, the founding CEO of the Rupertsland Institute, who is also a key founder of the Rupertsland Center for Métis Research. On June 14th, Lorne will receive an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from the University of Alberta. And Lorne has spent his career advocating and moving forward Métis education, training, and research. And Amanda will share the link to the folio article in the live chat. So congratulations, Lorne. So the goal and objectives of the Research Center include building provincial and national connections with the Métis community, increasing research capacity to advance Métis-specific research, and training and employing student researchers. Métis Talks are a semi-annual public event in the fall and spring that highlight Métis-specific research, but also art and culture. So today we have two presentations. The first one with Natalie Pepin, and the second with Jennifer Lessard. So this session today is an online session, and after each presentation, there will be 10 minutes where we will deliver questions from the audience to the presenters. So please ask your questions at any time in the live chat, and they will be relayed to the presenters. There's going to also be a recording of these presentations, and this will be available on the RCMR YouTube channel, and as well as our website. So our first presentation is from Natalie Pepin. Natalie is a Métis cultural educator who runs Meeting My Ancestors and hosts the Wasakam Indigenous Food Sovereignty camps in Northern Alberta. She's a Harvard graduate who left university with a profound desire to live simply and regain a connection with the land, drawing inspiration and guidance from the lives of her ancestors. Natalie shares traditional Métis arts and skills such as beading, silk embroidery, leatherwork, and hide tanning. She shares her passion for growing, foraging for, and preserving food with her community as a means of healing our relationship with the land. As a local food producer and homesteader, Natalie sees the importance of foods in not only our physical and community health, but also in reclaiming Métis culture and foodways. So today her presentation title is Two Roots, Métis Cultural Foodways Beyond the Hunt. Natalie, your turn.
Marcy, thank you all for joining us here today. I'm going to get started, and I do have some slides, so I'm going to share my screen, and I apologize. I'm used to speaking live, and I'm not used to using slides, so if I forget to advance them, I apologize in advance, but I'll share my screen now. There we go. So I'm going to start out in a proper way, and I will say, Tanshi Pakiakiwao, Natalie Pepin Dishnikashun Pekakisimo Isqueo Nitsigasun. Winnipeg Dushchin, Maka Tawatinao Niwikenekwa, Isqueo ut Pimshaknia, ou bien une femme chifnia. Cuthbert Grant, P. Pierre, P. Mary Falcon, P. Jean-Baptiste Richet, P. Marguerite L'Espérance, ni parenti, Kayash Uschinia. Hello, everyone. My name is Purple Woman, but I'm also known as Natalie Pepin, and I'm originally from Winnipeg. However, now I live in the Tawatina Valley, which in Cree or in the Heian means valley. So Tawatinao means valley. And in English, we say valley, valley, because English is funny that way. I introduced a few of my ancestors to you, and some of those names will be recognizable to you when I'm presenting at Fort Edmonton. I will often say my ancestors, depending on what side of history you stand on, they're either famous or infamous. And I'm proud of them regardless of what side of history one might stand on. Some of those ancestors include Cuthbert Grant, one of the first leaders of our nation, who is one of my great, 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 great uncles. And his sister, Marie Grant, married one of my great, great, great grandfathers, who was Pierre Falcon, who's known as the Bard of the Plains. And he was also an important leader in our nation, along with his brother-in-law, Cuthbert Grant, in both leading our hunts and some of our battles. I also introduced Jean-Baptiste Richet, who is one of my other great, great, great grandfathers, who was with Louis Riel when they stepped on the surveyor's chain and told them, you need to go home and don't come back without permission. I'm very proud of these ancestors of mine, and I really try to live in a way that they would recognize and be proud of. And that has taken me from my educational experiences, looking at environmental science, politics, and environmental management within businesses, and a degree with a focus on international relations, to where I am now, which is living on the land in Northern Alberta, where I teach traditional skills through my company, Reskilled Life, and I run a program specifically for Métis individuals who are looking to reconnect with their culture, called Meeting My Ancestors. I also partner with Fort Edmonton in the delivery of some of their Indigenous peoples workshops. And I, as mentioned, run the Wasakam Indigenous Food Sovereignty camps here in Northern Alberta, where we explore our relationship to the land through our foods. And so it's from all of these different focuses, backgrounds, that I'm coming to you today to talk about some of our stories and connections to the land. So it all starts with the land, Aski. And, you know, I could say the land is everything to us, and it might sound like really pretty words, like something a meme could be made out of, but it's literal. The land is everything to us. The land influences our language. It influences our clothing, our foods, our ceremonies, our arts. It's all based on our relationship with Aski, with the land. And this relationship with the land, it is a really important topic that I explore in all of the work that I do, as it is the source of everything that we have as a nation. Now, our relationship with our homeland is particularly important. We, of course, have relationship with wherever we live around the world. And I know that some of you may not be coming or joining us from our homeland right now, but this place where our nation was birthed and where we developed is really, really important to us and really, really important to me. And I'm really blessed to still live within my homeland. I want to start out today by talking a little bit about this word, asimoin, which means story. And these stories that we have about who we are, they're so critical. And I think they're especially critical because of our history and the stories that have been told to us about us for so many generations. For generations, our stories were not told by our own people in the broader public. They were told to us in history books. I remember grade 3 in Manitoba, and there's this unit in grade 3 social studies where you study Indigenous people. And you might remember that unit too. And I remember this unit especially because at this point, we were studying, and my teacher, he knew that I was Métis, and he had referred to me as Amérindien, which means Native American. And, I had been grown up to know my ancestry, to know my heritage, and to be very proud of it. My grandmother was very instrumental in this. And when he said this to me, I said, "Non, monsieur, moi je suis métis." I said, "No, sir, I'm Métis." And in grade 3, I didn't really understand what that was, what that meant to the full degree that I do now. However, I knew my grandmother was very proud of this, and I knew it was really important to us. And I was becoming more and more aware that there were stories that I was being told about my nation that weren't entirely true, and in some instances were not true at all. And so this notion of story became a big focus of what are people telling about us, and why are they telling us that story? Now, one of those main stories that we are told and that has incredible truth to it is that we are a nation of buffalo hunters. And there's this little quote here that I pulled off of one of the Government of Canada's websites. And it talks about one of our hunts in 1840. Now, this was kind of at the height of our buffalo hunts. And it says there were 620 men, 650 women, 360 children, and so many animals that were there along with us for our buffalo hunt. Now, it also goes on to say that this is about a third of the settlements in the Red River area. That's huge. So clearly, our buffalo hunts were an incredibly important part of our cultural identity and our regular experience throughout any given year. And so when I talk about that we have 2 routes and that we have foodways beyond the hunt, it is not to diminish the importance of the buffalo, li buffalo, or Pasquamostosh. It's not in any way diminishing the importance of this cultural phenomena for our nation. However, it's really important that we come to understand that stories really matter, and so does the purpose they were told. So one of the things that I find really interesting is that there is this perspective when settlement began in our homeland and across Métis, which is North and South America, that one of the pervasive stories being told was that this land was untouched, pristine, and wild. And this is a really common story in the writings of that day, that people were coming here for this wild, untouched wilderness. And this might seem like a really, mild story to tell, and perhaps even a really beautiful one. But what this also meant was that there were no long-standing influences by Indigenous peoples here in Métis. And this, of course, is a bold-faced lie. This is not true. That we have had incredible relationship with the land in multiple ways beyond hunting and gathering. Now, this is an important relationship that we have, but I'll ask you to think about, why would that story be so prevalent and important for those newcomers? What function might that story have? And I would suggest, as many do, that the story of an untouched wilderness and nomadic Indigenous peoples who did not toil on the land and raise crops or have permanent settlements across the prairies, that this was an important story because it allowed for the displacement of Indigenous peoples and for the justification of putting settler families in those places to begin to improve upon the land. So this is one of those potential purposes for those stories. Now, of course, as I said, this is a bold-faced lie. It's just not accurate. It's not historically accurate. We, of course, have many historical records indicating just how important our ongoing, purposeful relationship with the land has been in forming not only the future of North America, but also the current landscape of our food story globally. 60% of all food crops grown around the world today come from our Indigenous food crops that started here in Ministic. And I think that's worth noting. That's huge. That's a really, really big number. Now, we are a very large continent, and I think it stands to reason that there would be many contributions that we would be making to the global food landscape. However, I think it's really important to underline that more than half of all food crops are the result of Indigenous food knowledge and traditional plant relationships. Now, some of these you'll recognize. In fact, you should probably recognize all of these, but there's many more. Potatoes, corn, squash, beans, wild rice, tomatoes, peppers, chocolate are among some of the most recognizable crops that have their roots here in this place in North America. And there are, of course, so many more, but there's also an incredible diversity within these few categories of crops that have made their home here in Ministic for thousands of years. Now, I will point out, and it is incredibly valid to say, yeah, but those are southern crops. You know, not very many things grow easily up here in the north, and it's true. These plants began their stories much further south than where we are now. And in fact, it's posited that 11,000 years ago, potatoes were being consumed and grown in South America, southern Ministic. And so, you know, we might say, well, that's fine, but that's not our nation. But I will also add that these plants, they have spirits of their own, and they have knowledge and important teachings that they've been sharing on this land for a long time. And they've traveled quite far over the tens of thousands of years that they have been in existence. And in that time, through robust, well-developed trade routes from southern Ministic all the way up to the northern plains, they have spread to much of North America to the point where even I'm going to skip ahead by one. Even 400 years ago in Manitoba, many of these crops were shown to be grown in a domesticated way. So that means that corn, potatoes, tomatoes, all these things that grew once in South America had spread all the way up into our homeland, and that those cultivated plant relationships existed prior to contact in our homeland. Now, this is important because there's a dominant story also that as buffalo hunters, we were nomadic and did not have a green thumb at all. And I would posit that that story too is fabricated, that we have had domesticated agricultural plant relationships since our birth as a nation. And that, in fact, those relationships stem from both sides of our ancestry, that our Ojibwe ancestors had understanding, knowledge, and practice of raising crops, and that they gained those over hundreds of years also before the birth of our nation. that agriculture may have done best elsewhere besides the plains, but that it existed here. We also know that the Blackfoot in southern Saskatchewan grew tobacco as a cultivated crop many, many, many years before first contact with Europeans. So it's important to sit and ruminate on this. This is a really important piece of our history, our roots, that agriculture has been there since our very foundation. Now, for my family, it's been an interesting journey of discovery. You know, I shared with you some of my ancestors, and among those was Pierre Falcon, the Bard of the Plains, who wrote what's considered our nation's first national anthem. And many of his songs shared the stories of our buffalo hunts, our journeys across the plains. However, often there are records about Pierre Falcon, one of Nishapanak, one of my great-great-grandparents, that would paint him as a white settler because of this fact right here. He had a mare, 2 cows, a calf, and a pig. He was a rancher. He not only joined on our seasonal buffalo hunts, but he grew crops and raised livestock on the land near Saint-François-Xavier, which at that point in time was called Granttown. And this story is so common throughout so much of our nation that the St. Albert River lots were a place where many crops were first introduced to this region through Métis families. Buffalo hunters, yes, farmers also. That in Saskatchewan, the first wheat was grown by Métis farmers back in the 1800s. These are important parts of our collective story, of my family's story. Now, when I discovered this, I had just begun farming here in northern Alberta in the Tawatna Valley, and I was raising no mares. I've had no mares yet, no horses, but cattle and pigs and sheep and goats and chickens and many, many other animals. And in exploring that relationship that I was building with my food and with the land through my food, it was incredible to me to read, to stumble upon all of these details about our ancestors. Now, I'm fortunate. There are many records of many of my ancestors. Many things have been written about them. And to be able to see, this is a part of that ancestral lineage, that knowledge that my family also had about living in this place in a good way. And so it's important to understand we are a nation of buffalo hunters and farmers, and to begin to share that story, that we have 2 roots, and that our foodways are Indigenous agriculture and European agricultural experiences are incredibly important in our relationships with the land, with Aski. Now, I want to spend some more time. Now that we've gone through this foundation, I want to talk a little bit more about our relationship with the land. And this relationship, one way that we might term this or refer to this is Wakutuin, or Wakotoin, if we're more towards the Nehia language. And what Wakotoin means is that we are in relationship with everything, that there is a huge web of relationships that we exist within, and that we have many types of relationships with all of those beings that exist on the land. Now, I mentioned earlier that we have this belief and this foundational understanding that everything has a spiritual nature, that everything has a spirit. So the land, the rocks, the trees, the animals, these all have spirit, as do we. And that we are in relationship with those spirits, with those beings that exist here. Now, it's also our understanding that we are very reliant on those other beings, that we're not really above them. We're the youngest of all creation. We are the little brothers and sisters of everything else here, and that we're really dependent on them for our survival and also for all of our foods and arts and clothing and lodging, that we are in receipt of their generosity on a regular basis. And so these relationships, they are incredibly important for us to understand. Now, a history of colonization has interrupted those relationships. One of those first interruptions within our nation was the source of eventual battles. For example, the Battle of Seven Oaks, or the Battle of the Frog Plain, as we would know it. And our stands against the rules that were being shared with us from outside sources, telling us that we could not make and trade pemmican, or perhaps we should not hunt buffalo so close to this one area in order to give preference to others who needed to hunt there. And this was clearly a huge interruption within our culture as a history of buffalo hunters on the land and those that would be traveling throughout the land freely. Of course, colonization further changed our relationship with the land by drawing arbitrary borders across our homeland, separating families from each other. Finally, as time progresses, we have incredible trauma related to food, including starvation, removal from our homelands, and the very difficult road allowance days for many families. In that time, our relationship with food has become more and more disconnected from the land. And of course, during the resettlement or relocation days of many communities to make way for railroads, for settlers, for many other aspects of our colonial experience, we have seen the influx of our families into larger urban centers, disconnecting them from their land and our traditional cultural foodways. This trauma has a lasting impact in our health, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So one of the important aspects of the work that I do is that by reconnecting with our relationship to the land, to Wakotoan, to all of these important relationships on the land, we are not only becoming healthier people by understanding where our food comes and participating within that story, but we are healing ourselves spiritually and ancestrally with all of those members of our families, all of those ancestors who had to undergo all of those changes, all of those traumas over hundreds of years, removing them from our food sources. So as I talk about, traditional foods and some of these wild harvesting traditions that we clearly have, where bison, moose, blueberries, Saskatoon berries, all of these foods are incredibly important for us, and having a relationship with those foods is incredibly important. It's also important to realize that with so many of our families living in large urban centers, some of these foods are out of reach for our people, and that building a relationship with food from that other root that we have, that domesticated root, where we steward plant relatives and help them to grow, is also very important. One of the traditional methods that we might use historically and in a modern sense is the use of deadfall wood, where we would fill our garden beds or stack up logs beside our garden beds and then layer some dirt in between and plant into that. And it might seem like, it's a raised garden bed and they're just, making the soil deeper for growing things or making nice pathways by putting logs along the side. But there is traditional ecological knowledge that goes into that technique. And the purpose of this would be when that deadfall wood would be exposed to spring rains, it would charge that woody sponge with water, which would then be shared back to the soil and to all the plants planted in the soil over the drier months. And in a modern sense, we might call this something like a hugelkultur, which is a German term technically, where that dead rotting wood and other organic materials are layered on the soil, and then soil is put on top, and then we plant directly into that. And that decaying wood, it not only provides moisture to those plants, it also is going to help provide nutrition as it breaks down to those plants. Now, these are little nuggets of ancestral knowledge that we still have about our relationship with domestic plant relationships. But there's one other source that I want to introduce you to if you have not yet been introduced. And there's incredible knowledge shared in a book by Elder Elmer Ghostkeeper called Spirit Gifting. And in that book, he describes his family's and his community's relationship with the land. And that relationship was both wild harvesting, hunting, but also in their gardens that they grew, in the crops that they raised, in the livestock that they stewarded. One of the important ancestral nuggets of knowledge that he shares, that I'll share with you right now, is the importance of burning the grass in the springtime around our homes. Not only does this prevent fire from getting close to our homes, it also would add nutrition back into the soil. Our families typically would have kitchen gardens. And if you're in the Edmonton area and you're ever going down to Fort Edmonton, you'll see recreations of these around some of the homes attributed to Métis historical figures, where we have kitchen gardens with edible and medicinal herbs, with foods that would be consumed on the regular throughout the year. These relationships that we have with those plants, they extend beyond the practical into that spiritual realm where we can engage with those plants, not only by stewarding them physically, by giving them water, by making sure they have nutrition in the soil, by covering them when they need covering. This is one layer of a relationship that we might have with another being, providing for their physical needs. But just like people, as spiritual beings, we need more than physical care. We need to be sung to. We need to have connection to others. We need to be rooted in a healthy place. And that culture of the soil is a beautiful analogy for the importance of our culture. So in our culture, we are connected to so much meaning and beauty through all of the ceremony, the arts, the foods, the connections to family that we have. And in the soil, we can connect to that culture, that microbiome, that bacterial culture that feeds the plants and eventually through them feeds us. So this relationship that we have with the land, with the plants, it extends into a relationship with the soil, which is incredibly important. So all of these different aspects of our traditional foodways, both in wild harvesting and in stewarding plants, midwifing them on the land as a more regular, purposeful relationship, are among some of the ways that we can connect and heal ourselves and the land at the same time. Now, the last thing that I want to close with before we get into questions and some discussion is there's two things. The first is that Along with these relationships that we have with burning the grass to mitigate fire hazard, but also nourish the soil, along with these relationships that we have with starting seeds, planting seeds, growing food, and also having a traditional food-based economy with our pemmican trade, we have all of these sides that are very understandable to us. As we grow within our culture, as we connect deeply on both sides, we see that there are also other important sides to this relationship. One of the things that I enjoyed most about our Indigenous Food Sovereignty camps so far this year, we've had a winter camp and a spring camp. And at that winter camp, we invited an elder to come and help us wake up the seeds and wake up the land through ceremony. And in that ceremony, we were able to hear some songs that display and share and give voice to that relationship that we have. And so I'm really happy to have had that experience and to be able to share at that level too, that we aren't just engaging with our foods because it nourishes our bodies. We're engaging with our foods and with the land because it nourishes our souls. It nourishes our culture and our ancestral connection. So I'm going to share that one of the songs that I've shared in those camps and in many other places about our relationship with the land. And then I'll close off with one little story and then we'll go to questions. So I hope it sounds okay on YouTube. Holy, no pressure, hey? Ah, hey, yo, ah, hey, ya, hey. Ah, hey, yo, ah, hey, ya, hey. Ah, hey, yo, hey, yo. Ah, hey, yo, hey, yo. Wanesta waskik asisti. Wanesta kitsikanis. Kimuana poikitikia. Nakamoenkiaga migawia. Ah, hey, yo, ah, hey, ah, hey. Ah, hey, yo, ah, hey, ah, hey. Ah, hey, yo, hey, yo. Ah, hey, yo, hey, yo. Wanesta asis kimotiu. Wanesta osipikos. Kimoana poiketikia. Nakamoenkiaga migawia. Ah, hey, yo, ah, hey, ah, hey. Ah, hey, yo, ah, hey, ah, hey. Ah, hey, yo, hey, yo. Ah, hey, yo, hey, yo. Wanesta isquenuak. Wanesta napiwak. Kimuana poiketikia. Nakamoenkiaga migawia. Ah, hey, yo, ah, hey, ah, hey. Ah, hey, yo, ah, hey, ah, hey. Ah, hey, yo, hey, yo. Ah, hey, yo, hey, yo. Wanesta nipitana. Wanesta piesewaya. Kimuana poiketikia. Nakamoenkiaga migawia. So thank you for letting me share that. And I want to share what that song means. So most of those words, you could say that they're in Neheowen or Cree, or you could say they're in Northern Michif, because in this case, the words are pretty much the same. And the words, I'll share with you the meaning, and then I'll share with you the teaching behind them briefly. So the meaning of those words, Wanska means wake up. Wanska waskik asiski. So remember, aski is the land. Waskik asiski means topsoil. So we're waking up the topsoil. And that's really important. The topsoil is where all that nourishment is for those rooted beings. And so the next line, Wanska kitsikanes, wake up seeds. That bed of topsoil is where those seeds live. They don't really plant themselves deeper than the topsoil. There's very few rooted relatives who would be down that far. They live near the top because that's where they can have access to Kimowanapoi, that rainwater. So Kimowan means rain. Kimowanapoi, rainwater. So Kimowanapoi Kitsikia, this rainwater is for you. And then Nakamoenkia, Amiga, your song is a gift to us. And then the second verse, Wanska asis kimotiu. So aski being the land, asis kimotiu means earthworms, wake up. And then Wanska osipikos. So osipikos means a little rootlet. And those earthworms, they're important along with those roots. The earthworms are part of that microbiome I was talking about, that culture in the soil. And they are an indicator species, much like wolves or bears or mountain lions are indicator species. They're at the top of the food chain. Earthworms are kind of at the top of the food chain in the soil. And when you see lots of earthworms, it's a good sign that the soil is doing pretty well. Certain types of earthworms anyways. And so we are waking up those earthworms and waking up those roots. And then Wanska isqueowak, wake up women. Wanska napiwak, wake up men. And again, this rainwater is for you and your song is a gift to us. And then finally, Wanska nipikana, wake up wildflowers. And Wanska piesewayit, wake up thunder beings. Because in our indigenous traditions, the springtime, it starts when the thunder beings come back. Where I am, they haven't come back yet. So it's not spring. We're still in winter. And so this song, the teachings that go along with it is that as a nation and also our kinship nations, the Neheowen or Nehia and Anishinaabe and Saulteaux, all of these nations we're so closely related to, we have this tradition among our birthing people of singing to them as they birth new life. And this singing, it would help them through that period that we call transition. And it's really one of the hardest parts of giving birth. I've done it 5 times now, and I can tell you, transition, it's when you think you're going to die and you don't think you can get through it. And you want somebody to save you, but also don't touch me. And so it's a really hard time to get through, and our birthing people would be sung to in these times. And I want to put forth a notion that you might be familiar with and you might not, but that our mother is the land, that this land is our mother. And every spring she gives birth to the land anew. She brings new life back to this land. And in those last few weeks of winter, when it's been so dark and so cold, and we don't think we're going to make it through it, and we're pretty sure we're going to die this winter because it's just been so long, that this is transition in very much the same way before life returns to the land. And that we can sing to our mother in that time, that we can help her sing in the spring with this song. So those are the teachings that go along with this song. And I thank you for allowing me to share that with you. So why share this song last? This song is a part of a tradition that we have in being in good relationship with the land. So singing to our mother as she gives birth to spring, it's a part of a good relationship. And it allows us to understand our relationship with all of creation better, that all of those pieces, they have an important role to play in our culture and in our food story. Our culture is our instructions of how to live on the land in a good way, that our culture makes sense on this land. If you take our culture to Australia, it does not make sense anymore. Our foods aren't there. The flowers that we be, they don't exist there. And so our culture, it wouldn't make sense. It's out of context. But here on this land, our culture makes sense because it was birthed here. It's from here. And our culture allows us to be in this place in a good way. So as you leave and as we part ways later on today, I hope that you'll take that with you, that we can have good relationships through our culture, our Michif, Métis, Otpimsha culture, and that those relationships with the land, they do include hunting and gathering, harvesting berries, medicines, making chokecherry syrup, all of these important foodways. And they also include our domestic plant relationships. And in your gardening this summer, as you're weeding the garden or tending to those plants, I hope that you remember that you are living out your culture in those ways also. So I'm going to wrap it up there and say, Marcy, thank you so much for the time that we've spent here together. And we could have some questions now.
Thank you very much, Natalie. So I'll turn to Amanda for questions, as she's the one who's receiving those questions from the public.
Yes, I'm also going to just kind of transfer them over into the chat too, so you can see exactly what the question was. So our first question comes from, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Wichihu, who asks, could you please recommend important Métis plants that one can include in their garden?
Definitely. Okay, so that's a big answer that I could give you. There's so many of them. So it depends. It depends what type of garden you're growing. I was blessed to be involved in the design and installation of the community garden at the Métis Nation of Alberta offices in the community of Kingsway in Edmonton. And there, what we did is we did a blend of cultivated garden space, like a traditional garden in the shape of a wagon wheel, of course, but also including perennial food sources, which you can include in your home garden. So things like blueberries would be a beautiful addition. If your soil is acidic enough, plant some blueberries. I highly recommend them. However, there are also some non-traditional plants that you could perhaps cultivate. One of those that I love so much is fireweed. Now, I mentioned that we would burn the soil around where we live. And one of those things that fireweed loves most is disturbed soil through fire or just through tilling it up. They love it so much. And fireweed is one of our traditional foods. We might call it Métis asparagus. And those new shoots, when they come up, I tell you, they're delicious. They taste like asparagus. I wrap them in bacon and bake them. I make cream of asparagus soup. It's so, so good. So that would be one that's perhaps considered more, or two examples that are considered more wild, that are important plants for us that you could include in your gardening efforts this year. So those are perennial plants. Now, I could also say growing potatoes is incredibly culturally appropriate. In fact, when you ask elders, what are our foods? What are Métis foods? Often you'll hear corn, potatoes, buffalo, and moose, because those are our foods. So you could grow potatoes and feel incredibly culturally connected in doing that. Finally, tomatoes. And it's funny because I don't have the best relationship with tomatoes. I don't know if it's because I live so far north and they really want to be back home in Manitoba, I think, where the summers are just a little bit longer than here in northern Alberta. But they don't grow well for me, but they are another absolutely wonderful one to introduce into your garden. There are so many more that I could share. Honestly, the list is quite long. But those are some good ones to start out with. And feel free to connect with me through the Wasakam, WASAKAM, Facebook page. And there I share even more on this topic through our food sovereignty camps, but you can also message me there and I could give you some more specific suggestions for your context. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, that's an amazing response too. And then, yeah, I'll probably be reaching out. Another question from the same person was, where did you get the 60% stat from?
The University of Saskatchewan has an absolutely fantastic page discussing Indigenous agriculture, and that comes from some of their research that they've shared on that page. If you'd like, so it's hard to share links. We're kind of in different platforms. I'm on Zoom, you're on YouTube. However, I could share a link to that website on the Wasakam page on Facebook. So if you do come and find me, it will be waiting there for you in the comments. I'll put it as a post, which shares that source for that number.
If you want, you can share it in the Zoom chat here, and then I'll transfer it over into YouTube as well.
Amazing. I will do that as we are chatting.
And then I think we have time for one more question before we move on to the next presenter. Do you see a relationship with cattle on the land? Is it similar to buffalo or different? And this comes from James Bradbury.
This is a really good question. So part of the teachings that we share in the Wasakam project that I have is that, bison were so important in all parts of our culture and all parts of the health of the land. They shaped this landscape in incredible ways. And we are, being modern people, faced with the reality that the bison do not exist in large number across our homeland. And some of the teachings shared with me when I was really young from one of my elders, he was a Blackfoot elder, Narcissus blood. He used to talk about all the time that we cannot heal the land or anything happening on the land until the buffalo are brought back. They need to be on the land to heal it. And I firmly believe that we will see that in our children's or grandchildren's lifetimes, that the buffalo are going to be coming back because they have to. It's lunacy not to bring them back. However, in the meantime, what we can do through our relationships with the land is begin to relate to those other beings, those little buffalo. In Cree, the word for cattle, it's like little buffalo. And what we can do with those is help them follow Creator's instructions. So what does that mean for cattle? It means multi-species rotational mob grazing. So any rancher is going to perhaps have a clue of what I'm talking about. The bison moved. They didn't stay in one place. If they did, they might have destroyed the land. They moved often. And when we are managing cattle on the land, that's critical for a good relationship, both with the cattle and with the land, that they be moving constantly. It's also important to remember that there is nothing in the environment that is isolated all by itself all the time. We can't just have cattle on the land. We need multiple species working together. Some of the teachings at our camp is about Pasqua, Mostos, the buffalo, and the birds, and that the buffalo and birds had this beautiful symbiotic relationship where the birds would go and sanitize the pasture, sanitize the prairies after the buffalo had gone through. They would eat all the grubs growing in those incredibly nutritious dung patties from the buffalo. And that would be the start of a food chain on the prairies where higher birds, where other animals, foxes would eat those birds. And it created this beautiful ecosystem. We can do the same with cattle. We can encourage those same relationships, not as a replacement for bison. There are things about bison that only bison can be. However, we can begin to heal the land in the way we interact with agriculture right now also. So I feel like I got a little preachy there, and I apologize. It's important to me as somebody who raises cattle. And again, I hope we can further this conversation both on Facebook or in whatever other means people would like. And I'm really excited to hear from Jenni Lessard now to take this home. Take it home, Jenni. So I'm going to say thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention and for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for your presentation and for your passion as well. Of course, maybe in the future we'll have the opportunity to discuss more about food and food sovereignty and some of the challenges and also, you know, like the hope for the future. So we're going to turn to Jenni Lessard, and Jenni is a chef and a culinary consultant who lives and works on Treaty 4 territory and homeland of the Métis in the Kermoal Valley near Regina. Jenni serves as Secretary of the Indigenous Culinary of Associated Nations and is a citizen of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. Since 2005, she's been harvesting and serving Indigenous ingredients, first in her restaurant, New Ground Cafe, then in her catering business, Chef Jenni Cuisine. You're just as likely to find her in a chokeberry bush as a commercial kitchen, as the dishes she creates are closely linked to seasonality and culture. So our presentation title today is From Rose Hips to Spruce Tips, a recipe for food sovereignty. Jenni?
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Natalie. My speaker's notes are all covered with notes that I was taking while you were sharing your knowledge with us. So I have a lot of things to check out, and you've just filled in a lot of blanks for me and also created more trails that I want to go down. So merci for that. Thank you very much. And the song too, that was amazing. Our Thunder people in the Kermoal Valley came back last night in a big, loud, beautiful thunderstorm. So and everything's greening up. So I'm so excited to get out there and start seeing what's on the ground and in the bushes, and then also planting my garden in a week or so. I think I reversed my title of my of my talk. I should have said from spruce tips to rose hips, but then again, since everything goes in a circle, where is the start and where is the end? So maybe it isn't backwards. But the reason I chose that talk is because spruce tips are the first thing that I start harvesting in the spring. It's one of the first things around here that's green, and you can just walk by and just take one of those beautiful bright green spruce tips, put it in your mouth, and to me it just has the taste of spring. It's green, it's fresh, it's a little bit tart, it's full of vitamin C. And then rose hips are one of the last plant nations that I harvest in the fall. They're best after the frost goes through, and they're a little bit sweeter. So I'm often harvesting those in late October. And when I put those in my mouth, spitting out the seeds, of course, it just has almost like the whole summer is in my mouth. The sun, the heat, the rain, and I kind of eat those and harvest those and say thank you for a beautiful summer of harvesting. My journey through to food sovereignty is a little bit unique, I think, because I've brought so many people along with me on that journey, as has Natalie. And as any journey, it hasn't been straightforward. It's been backwards and sideways. And I feel now, knowing what I know, I feel like my ancestors have kind of been pushing me from the back, and I feel like the generations to come are kind of pulling me from the front, if that makes any sense. So come along with me. And the way that I tell stories is through food and photos. So I'm going to show you a bunch of those now. So I was born in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, which is where my Métis roots are, in the Red Deer Hill area. And despite my last name, which comes from my father, Lessard, the Métis part of my family are the Scottish and English bird, halcrow, Campbell, knight, hallet. When I was 2 months old, so just a newborn, my dad took a job with the Prince Albert Pulp and Paper Company. So we moved about 300 kilometers north to a place called Besnard Lake. And we lived right there in the pulp camp. There were a couple other families there. There was James and Melanie Bradfield were two kids that spoke only Cree. And then there was a family from Norway who Ogie and Roy spoke only Norwegian. So we were, and then we were these little Métis kids. So it was quite an interesting upbringing. It was an eagle sanctuary. So the eagles flying over us as we played. And we just were kind of free range children. So that was awesome. So in this picture, I'm in the blue and we're going out to visit our friends, John and Damar Hastings at their trap line. So when I grew up, there were plants all around me and we didn't have TV to distract us. So I was always out picking berries and I'd come to the house and say to my mom, is this edible? I had learned that word and thought it was a big, impressive word. And she'd say yes or no, and then I would proceed to eat it or cook with it. We have low bush cranberries, the lingonberries, we have blueberries. This is us going to visit John and Damar. My sister and I would get into that little toboggan sled and come out burping skidoo gas fumes. But I remember walking up to John and Damar's cabin, smelling the wood smoke and sitting down and having tea. And I was only 4 years old, but I was allowed to drink tea there and only there until I was a bit older. And seeing the beaver pelts hanging in the cabin, touching that soft fur, and just telling stories and hearing stories and feeling so just welcomed. And I do a lot of work with Indigenous tourism and culinary tourism. And I often tell groups that that's my first memory of what I would say. They were our friends, and obviously they weren't charging us for tea and bannock and and dinner, but I want to always, in everything I do and all my food ventures, bring that sense of welcome and hospitality to what I do. Damar told us that it's best to harvest the rose hips after the frost, so I also consider that my first teaching of plant knowledge. And I thank her for that. So this is kind of where I grew up. Then we moved north of La Ronge, Saskatchewan, by a little lake called Lamp Lake. It was about a mile by half a mile across. And, you know, there's bedrock, moss, Labrador tea, mint growing around the lake, lots of fireweed, as Natalie mentioned, even more now because the whole area in 2015 just burned through. So the forest is coming back to life. But that's where I grew up. I would take little naps in the moss and eat the lichens that grew on the rocks. So that was just natural to me. The local food thing was just right literally around my house. And then my first little commercial restaurant, there's no photos of it, thank goodness, because our hair was awful in the 90s. But two friends and I started a little hamburger stand at the La Ronge airport. We rented the food trailer from the Kignac Friendship Center, and we served chips and pop and burgers and hot dogs to the people coming in from the north. So that was my first taste of, selling food to people. I can make a living doing this. Now, granted, the food we were selling wasn't very healthy, but it was still that connection to we're feeding people, and I loved that. And I knew that's what I wanted to do somehow. Let's go back. So my parents got divorced when I was 16, and I moved with my mom to Jasper, Alberta. And I worked for my uncle at his fruit stand, and he'd come back from the Okanagan with all this beautiful fruit, and I'd go with him to deliver it to the restaurants. We'd walk in the kitchen and the chefs would treat him like he was a rock star. Peter's here, and we'd get a seat by the bar, and they'd make us his, pasta with all his vegetables. And that's when I kind of thought, okay, I've had northern food where I grew up, wild food, it's amazing. Local food seems to be way better than any vegetables or fruits that, come to me from the store that I've tried. So again, a seed was planted of, I always knew I wanted to have a restaurant. So I was thinking, could I combine these two things? But I was young. I thought I'd have a lot of time to do that, maybe in my retirement. But life sometimes has other plans. So I got married very young to a Saskatchewan guy. And we moved to the little farming community of Birch Hills. I'm just going to make sure that everything's going well here and you can hear me and everything. Okay, so we moved to Birch Hills. I had 2 little kids. I was working as a freelance writer. I had no formal culinary training, and I needed to make more money to support my family. So 1,000 people in this town. I thought, what could I do? A little space came up for rent. So that's that little kind of orange colored space. It was about the size of a person's regular kitchen, had 14 seats. And I started serving my Aunt Ruth's bannock recipe and 2 different soups a day, Red River cinnamon buns, because I wanted to kind of pay homage to my Métis history. And also the town itself had at one time been called Harperview because it was Métis people that settled it, but that had all been forgotten or, put away. And there wasn't even a street named after any of the original Métis settlers. So I wanted to bring that back into the community. So serving bannock, it doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but oh, it was. People would say, why are you serving this? There was a little bit of, there was a lot of interest, but there was a little bit of backlash to that too, which I found really interesting, but it didn't really change my mind at all. And things kind of evolved pretty quickly from there. People were excited to hear the stories, and I had, I often wore my sash to cook because it was very handy. You could grab hot pots with it. You could, it kind of held your apron together. So, I was able to share the stories of the sash and things like that. So eventually I needed a bigger space, even though this town was very small and we were close to the city of Prince Albert. So I was confident that people would come out if I had a larger space. So with some funding from Aboriginal Business Canada, as it was called then, and the Clarence Campbell Development Fund, I bought this brick building in the second picture down the street. And my vision was to have food, music, and art, which I did. And I was able to put in a kitchen garden in the back, which was very important to me because we always had a garden, as Natalie said. My grandma, who lived in Prince Albert, she gardened until she was 93. And it was a huge part of her health and the health of her family. So the kitchen garden was important to me. I didn't know at that time, and I guess I didn't even really think, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to serve people food that comes from this good, clean soil right behind my restaurant in these raised beds? And the health inspector never told me I couldn't, so I just kept doing it. I cultivated a lot of other local sources of food, from pork to bison, grass-fed beef, fish from the north. So I got fish from Dory Lake. And I also had a fellow who grew a larger garden for me, everything from hemp hearts to fennel. He was just an amazing young Métis guy who grew anything I wanted to supplement my garden and what I bought from other people. So it was really simple. I just had a chalkboard menu. It changed every day, no paper menus, soup, comfort food. You can see my grandma's date oatmeal cookies back there. And another thing that was important to me is making sure that I had fair trade coffee. So the other kind of uproar in town when I opened was I served fair trade coffee, and I had to up the price of coffee from $1 to $1.25 because, I was paying a fair price for my coffee. And then I didn't want to waste any of that coffee. So if there was some left in the pot, I would freeze it, and then I would make a simple syrup for my Red River cinnamon bun icing. So I'd do cream cheese, butter, like a coffee syrup, and cinnamon and icing sugar. And then I also used it in my date filling. So that was another value that I got from my grandma and my mom, is it's not right nor culturally appropriate to waste food. So I did not waste food in my restaurant. This is kind of backwards, but the first thing I did when I moved to the second place is donate the deep fryer to the Lions Club, because I didn't want to I love fries, so it's a bit hypocritical, but I wanted to, on a daily basis, serve healthy, heart healthy, good, clean, fair food to my customers. That's my son, he's now 23. But what was also important, why I wanted to show you these before pictures, is food isn't just about what goes in your body. It's where you eat it, how you feel when you're eating it, what the person who cooked it, what they feel about the ingredients, how they respected them, and how they dealt with the preparation of the food. So I wanted to create a space that people could feel inspired in, happy, relaxed, and at home. So I didn't have a lot of money to work with, but pardon my collage, I had too many things to show you. So nice, bright green colors of nature, oranges and reds and woods. And people seemed to really like that. They felt at home, and I started to get a wide following of people from Saskatoon, Prince Albert, Melfort, Humboldt, which some of you probably don't know those names, but it's within about a 200-kilometer radius of the restaurant. I started serving lentils and barley and things that grew right around the area, which the farmers really loved. I did about 4 outside dinners, so ice cafes where we ate 4 courses right outside. So just being able to be creative and do different things. We had live music. So that was, again, to have fiddle music playing in the restaurant, have 46 people stomping their feet and tapping their toes. And then when that evening would be over, I felt like that the energy of those nights would just stay in the restaurant and keep me going on those 19-hour days in a way that nothing else could. So just some of the events we had at the restaurant, I love to fill it with people. But because local food was such a hot topic kind of in the 2005 to 2000, well, it still is, but when I opened my restaurant was 2005, I got a lot of media attention for doing what I was doing. Nobody was really talking about Indigenous cuisine at that time. I wasn't hiding the fact that I was Métis or that I was serving Indigenous cuisine, but nobody really wanted to hear about it like they do now, but they wanted to hear about the local part. So I remember one time I had a Saskatoon Star Phoenix reporter came out and did a story on the restaurant, and he took a picture of my chalkboard, and I had served rabbit stew. So that was on the chalkboard. And the day after the story came out, the health inspector came and asked to see my freezer and see where I was keeping the rabbit carcasses. And I said, well, I don't have a trap line. I'm living kind of in farming community. I buy my rabbit from Pineview Farm. So that was the place where I bought my poultry, and they were also raising rabbits. But they didn't ask to, look at any of the ingredients that were on, and I didn't really have any packaged ingredients, but I was really blown away by, I could have had lunch meat with, 45 separate ingredients, but they were just super concerned about the fact that I could be serving rabbit. So then I kind of thought, oh, maybe I should ask permission to serve my, choke cherries and spruce tips and all my berries and some mushrooms that I was using. But yeah, that was kind of an eye opener to, oh, we're supposed to ask permission to serve our traditional foods. And I love working with health inspectors, and I think they've become a lot more cognizant of the fact that traditional foods and local foods have a place, and they're really willing to work with us, not against us. So that's a good thing. But back in 2005, it was a little bit different. So I sold my restaurant in 2012, moved to Saskatoon, and did catering. So it seemed like people wanted to have my services when it was the weirdest location, or they knew I would say yes to outdoor cooking. So in the upper left, I'm serving a meal for a sustainability project at the University of Saskatchewan, and someone's 100-year-old garage on top of an upturned canoe. So just things like that. I was the chef in residence at the Saskatoon Farmers Market and did lots of things with the vendors. I was in this photo, I'm working with a sea buckthorn vendor to create a bunch of dishes. I did a lot of weddings, outdoor weddings, indoor weddings. The kind of sushi looking thing is with barley, and there's wild rice and rhubarb. And instead of guacamole in a California roll or avocado, I used asparagus. But now I think I'm going to try fireweed asparagus, because Natalie I've never heard of using the shoots. It was kind of full circle too, because I ended up catering for the Clarence Campo Development Foundation. So that was really nice. And I got in touch with a group called Chep Good Food, and they have a garden called the Aski Garden, so the Earth Garden. So that's where I got a lot of my root vegetables, my squash, and most of my greens for my catering. operation. Let's see how much time we have here. See if I need to start talking a little bit faster. Another thing I started to do was cooking competitions. And the first dish was kind of more of a European flair, but I used wild harvested ingredients. So I made a cattail pollen spätzle, however you want to say it, little German noodles. And I had to harvest, I think it was about a week of harvesting for about 2 hours a day, because the cattails only have that beautiful yellow pollen for about a week, and shorter if the wind comes. And I also wanted to make sure I wasn't robbing it all from the birds and the bees. So I think it took about probably, I don't know, 12 hours of harvesting. And then I had juniper spiced lentils and a morel, kind of a puddle colored with spirulina. And then the last time I competed, kind of before the pandemic started, I decided that I was just going to burst forth with my Métis cuisine into these competitions. And I did a dish called Lessard. I decided that I need to learn Michif, and why not start with the sun? So that's what Lessard means. So everything on the dish with kind of the crackers coming off it is made with plants from the sunflower family. There's a sunchoke puree, and that was colored with marigold flowers that the Esky garden folks had dried for me. Endive, which is part of the sunflower family, grilled with dandelion honey, and there was a sunflower seed foam. So that was really well received, and I actually got bronze for that, which I wasn't sad about because it kind of matched the colors of my dish. There's lots of different kinds of winning, but for me, it was just great to be able to get out there and introduce Saskatoon culinary scene to Michif and just and this was a vegan dish too, ironically. While I was catering, I was approached by the folks at Wanuskewin Heritage Park. I get a big smile on my face when I say Wanuskewin, because I know we're not supposed to have favorite clients, but they are high on my list. So their chef at the time, in about 2017, didn't want to do outdoor cooking or use any ingredients that were not sourced through traditional, well, not traditional, but modern means like the Cisco truck or grocery stores. So they called me in to do some of their special events, and I did a culture camp with Jim and Betty Highway from Pelican Narrows. So all they needed is for me, with my insurance, to kind of take the initiative and say, I'll take this fish when it comes in from the north, keep it in my commercial kitchen, then bring it back out and bring it down to the park, and we'll cook it together. Now, to me, that's a little bit ridiculous, because these folks have been harvesting and preparing this fish, and their families have been doing it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. They do not need to be told how to safely prepare fish. But that was the hoop we had to jump through, and I was happy to jump through it with them. And the fish was delicious. Another time I was asked to create desserts using harvested ingredients based on Norval Morisot's work. And I think in this, just move the screen, on this plate, I had a wolf willow meringue. I had a dried bison chocolate truffle. And I can't remember what else that is, but the paste, the black paste, is charcoal from the forest fires that happened around my childhood home. And then another benefit of working with Wanuskewin is they really propelled me forward in knowledge of the harvesting protocols. I always knew from the time I was a little girl that I had to give something back when I picked something, but I didn't really know how to do that or why I should do it. But there was a wonderful interpreter living there or working at Wanuskewin called Ashley Rabbitskin. And she just took me through the whole Opimihaw Valley and showed me what grew there and explained how to place tobacco offerings. And I'm so grateful for her for sharing those teachings with me. So these are some of the things that grow on Treaty 6 territory and down here on Treaty 4 that I cook with. So there's choke cherries, Saskatoon berries. We know that the city of Saskatoon is kind of badly named after a Cree word for choke cherry, which is Nis Saskatoonina. I mean, badly named in that I wish we could have the full Cree name as the name of the city now. wolf willow berries, which were used to thicken and sweeten soups and stews, nettle, and this is me harvesting nettle underneath a very special place in Wanuskewin. It's underneath the Neo-Asiniak bison jump. And the nettle grows very high there, partly because there's more bison bone in that particular area than there is dirt. So it's heavily fertilized. And remember that Neo-Asiniak, I'll tell you another reason about why that's very, very special later. Tamarack, I used tamarack. I just harvested it when it had changed color and flash fried it for a nice crunchy topping. And then I was asked by Wanuskewin to help create the culinary portion of a Hanwi dinner series. So Hanwi is Dakota for a moon, but it translates, I think, from night sun. So originally we were going to have dinners outside on the land, 4-course dinners on the full moon, but it became a little bit difficult to schedule things around the moon, but they're still outside and they're still called the Hanwi dinner. Isn't that the best seat in the house? It's so exciting. So I forage a lot of most of the ingredients. And then we also still get things from the ski garden. And of course, bison is a huge, huge part of that dinner. And cooking up on that land is just incredible. Open air. You never know what's going to happen. Sometimes the earth tells us that we need to go back down into the valley or inside the building, and then we do that because that's our most important consideration in doing these dinners, is the impact to our mother, to the earth. So we want to make sure that if it's too dry or too windy or the thunder is happening, that we get everybody safely inside. But usually that doesn't happen. We get to remain outside. There's food and storytelling after, music. And I wanted to start by showing you the people that helped with this dinner, because that's very important. So my dear friend Julie Bear, who's from Shoal Lake First Nation, assists me and I assist her with preparing the meal. And then Honey Constant from Sturgeon Lake First Nation, she is the interpreter that leads guests up to the top of the valley and shows them all the plant nations as they walk up. So by the time they arrive, they kind of know the story of what they're going to be eating. When we initially started the dinners, I reached out to public health, and I'm talking about public health a lot because that's a huge reason why we don't see a lot of Indigenous cuisine restaurants, lining the streets, because if you can't cook in the way that you were taught to cook, if you can't cook exactly the ingredients that you are cooking with, we always have discussions at ICAN, Indigenous Culinary of Associated Nations, of how can we either adapt these ingredients to fit the regulations, or how can we just go and do this somewhere else where it's allowed? So public health kind of said, no, you don't need any special regulations. And every year I kind of go back and ask, and they say, no, as long as you have hand washing facilities and you're preparing everything according to safe food practices, you are fine. So that's great. We start out with a bannock bake, and circling back to New Ground Cafe and my At Roots bannock recipe, that's what we serve. I do whole wheat, half whole wheat and half white flour. And then there's a Three Sisters salad with most of the ingredients from the ski garden. The drink is a choke cherry sparkling beverage. There's no alcohol. The elders decided that alcohol shouldn't be served at Wanuskewin or in the Okimahal Valley, so we respect that, and we have a choke cherry juniper sparkler with wolf willow and cane sugar rimming the glass. And then, of course, the star that we're very thankful for is the bison as the main course, with chanterelles from northern Saskatchewan, and then a nettle and sunchoke puree underneath it from nettle that I pick under the bison jump. So then I was actually asked to be executive chef at Wanuskewin. So their chef moved on to another opportunity, and I came in just before the pandemic. So August 2019, I became executive chef at Wanuskewin, and one of my first jobs was to curate a coffee blend for the park. So we worked with Road Coffee of Saskatoon, and Alicia in the middle, she's the powerhouse behind Road Coffee, and she had Darlene on the far right picture. Darlene's the amazing CEO of Wanuskewin. She came with us and a few other people from our team, and we were able to try coffees from all over. And I've never heard this word before, Natalie, but Ministic, South America and North America. So we selected beans from Costa Rica, Colombia, and Brazil, and then we had the bison blend. And what made that especially important is that in December 2019, December 7th, and then another arrival on December 17th, I believe, bison came back to Wanuskewin Heritage Park after about 150-year absence. So I was able to be present for that and cook for the people who were gathered, some of whom had been working on this project for 40 years. And of all the meals I've cooked and all the groups I've fed, that meal on that day, the first group of bison came back to the park, I felt so honored to be cooking. And I felt like everything was leading to that moment. And as soon as the bison came out of the trailer, the whole energy at the park changed. And it was like it was 60% more alive than it had been. Again, that's 60% coming up, but that's just what I felt. So that was pretty amazing. And then another just great thing that happened at the park was in August 2020, we were closed because of the pandemic. So there were no guests there. And the bison they aerate the soil with their hooves. So they were doing that, which is why one of the reasons why they're so great for the land. They were pawing away at the ground, and the bison handler, who's actually a non-Indigenous guy who was brought in to help bring the bison back, he just noticed that there was something special about where they were pawing. So he called the park founder over, Ernie Walker, who's an archaeologist, and it ended up being a petroglyph, so a rock that was marked with drawings of bison, I suppose to indicate where the bison jump was and a few other things. I'm not an archaeologist, so I probably explained that very badly, but there ended up being 4 stones, Neo-Assyniac, 4 stones. So the bison jump was named 4 Stones by the elders in 1992 when the park opened. Almost 20 years, well, more than 20 years before the bison discovered those 4 stones. Another thing that happened when I came to the park is it was a little bit cafeteria style, and there were pop machines, and we served hot dogs to the kids, which I know kids love hot dogs, but we wanted to give them a cultural experience that extended to the culinary world. So I was able to find a few funds and made them stretch and just change the dining room so it was a little more welcoming and traditional, and then change the menu to be include some of these plant nations from the valley. Then when we shut down for COVID, there was still a lot of work to do. We had to make sure that the ingredients at the kitchen were used well. So we did community initiatives to help feed. This was, I think, 100 turkey dinners that went to student families from the Saskatoon public school system. So the team and I were putting them together there. Bannock stuffing, sage turkey, low bush cranberries, Three Sisters cookies, and then those were delivered all over the city. So there was a lot to do during the shutdown. But when I went back, when we reopened in September, I was feeling that I needed to do something else. And my relationship was taking me back down south. And I wanted to, for years and years and years, I just followed my work and worked and worked and worked and kind of neglected my relationships. And that's not healthy for your clients or the people you work with or yourself. So in this case, I decided, nope, I'm going to follow my heart. So I moved down here to Lumsden and I became the Indigenous culinary consultant at Wanuskewin. And I still work with them on the Hanwi dinner, the outside projects, but they have another culinary manager now. So my first job when I started Inspired by Nature Culinary Consulting was to take on a project with the Saskatchewan Health Region as part of the Nourish 2.0 project to bring Indigenous cuisine to the patient menus at the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital in Saskatoon. So I had actually come down with COVID in January 2021, and I lost my sense of taste and smell. So the team was very kind and let me recover for a month. Wouldn't have been any good creating a menu and I couldn't taste or smell. And then because I'm always harvesting and drying and preserving and freezing, my pantry and my freezer, my cupboards were full of these indigenous ingredients. And what I didn't have, I could get in from my suppliers, from the relationships I cultivated. So working in tandem with the kitchen team at City Hospital and with the patient advisory group and with elders, these menu items came to be for the Children's Hospital. And because I don't want food waste and because I was cooking at home, I was able to recover from my illness while eating these traditional foods. So that, as again, I feel like I was the right person for the job because I had the ingredients and the past experiences. So I was very honored to do that. We have wild rice. I'll go really quick because I know we're running out of time. Little tiny, cute little wild rice flour pancakes with choke cherry syrup and maple butter. Three Sisters cookies. Those are not chocolate chips. They're actually black beans. Bison, kind of a pizza pop with the whole wheat bannock. The middle one is for texture modified diets for kids that have trouble swallowing. So it's a turkey, sage, kind of a meatball, and then a sunflower, carrot, potato, peas with lake mint. I believe that's a bison stew and some more bannock. So that was an incredible project to start out with. And now I work with Indigenous food companies. This is with North NWC Wild Rice. I was doing a little cooking video and made some pickerel wild rice cakes with blueberry juniper sauce. And because I lived in the North and I've worked at wild rice camps, I kind of know that product intimately and I'm so thankful for it. And then I work with Boreal Heartland, which is a non-timber forest product economic development agency in La Ronge. So we're making soup mixes with northern ingredients and they're paying people a fair wage to get out on the land and harvest these ingredients. So that was a Boreal oatmeal with wild rice flour, dried blueberries, puffed wild rice, a Boreal borscht. Again, the Métis garden vegetables, wild rice, juniper, morels, and then a trapline chili where you can add any ground meat you want, and then lentils and wild rice and all their seasonings. And then I'm working on an outdoor winter experience at Wanuskewin. So here, Honey Constant is helping me figure out like what would people have eaten in the winter? How do we not just survive but thrive on the plains in the winter? And that turned into something that we're calling the working title, Bonsawan, which is thinly sliced meat, which is bison dry meat. So, and then I got a Métis potter to create these mugs that are really great for soup in the winter. So it just kind of goes year round, and I'm so grateful to be doing what I'm doing with the Indigenous Culinary of Associated Nations. It's the chef or the culinary part of ITAC, the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. So there's chefs from Nunavut to Manitoulin Island. Krista's at Feast Bistro in Winnipeg. Paul's out on Vancouver Island. Or sorry, he's in Vancouver, and we meet virtually, and now we're starting to travel again and do events. But it's just been so exciting. And my latest thing that I was excited to do. Oh, here we are at Devour Fest in Wolfville last fall. Joseph Shawana is the president of ICANN. Here I brought him some Labrador tea, and he mixed that with cedar, oranges, and for a little cold drink. And then he's making maple sugar with maple brought to us from Cezanne Nottaway, who's one of our Quebec chefs. Heikki came from Finland. He's one of the Sami people. So he was doing blueberry dyed moss, which was delicious. And then Taylor is of Cherokee descent. She came from Oklahoma and she was sharing her food as well. So things are happening out there. We're starting to just get together, talk, work out these problems of, how can we, when can we, why do we? And putting those things all together. I was actually super excited to be on a show called Fire Masters. And I know in the culinary world, sometimes we say like, oh, this the TV chefs versus the real chefs. And there's a little bit of ribbing about that. But in this case, I was able to, because I asked if I could, and they said yes, was able to share my Métis culture on the show. So that's really exciting. And then this fall, I'm going to be I know it sounds like me, but this is the story. And I think if I can tell this, and I do tell this to culinary students and to Indigenous tourism students at high schools, that your journey can be so exciting. This is how I did it. This is what I was able to do. I'm so excited to see what everyone else does. And I don't want to be like, right now, I think when people think of Métis female chefs, especially, I get asked to do a lot of these jobs. I want it to be that I'm like the last person to be asked, and there's all these other people that are doing it that they can choose from. Because I think legacy work is really important, especially when I've benefited from so many other people's and women's knowledge. But in September, I'm going to be the chef in residence at the National Arts Center in Ottawa. And it's a Métis themed menu. And I give credit to the people who've shared their recipes with me and their ingredients. And the menu's not finalized yet. So if anybody here listening thinks of something that should be on that menu, I still have time to squeak it in, and I'll credit you for that. So in conclusion, thank you for listening. Thank you for organizing this event, Rupert's Land, and I hope we can do this again. I wish we could talk all day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenni, for sharing your story, as well as the beautiful pictures of food. Like I'm saliving right now, and I just want to have access to that food and taste the different dishes. So thank you very much for sharing with us. So I'm going to turn to Amanda and see if we have any questions.
Yes, I will echo that. I know we're creeping into the noon hour right now, and everything looked absolutely delicious. So I might take a trip to Ottawa to come see you when you're cooking.
Yeah.
Come to Edmonton.
Yeah. So our question here is from Hillary. She asks, where do you get sea buckthorn, and can it be grown in Calgary?
Sea buckthorn is not native to North America. It originates in Russia and China. There's a lady in Saskatchewan that was really influential in bringing it here, and her company is called Invigorate, so N-Vigorate, and I can provide that link later, but she has everything, all the knowledge that you need from where to get plants to where to buy the berries. So NVIGORATE.com, I believe. And the cool thing about sea buckthorn is it has to be harvested when the branches are when the branches are frozen. So it's harvested in September here. They cut the branches off, put it into a reefer truck at like minus, I don't know, 22. The workers go in their snowsuits, like actually, and the branches have long thorns on them too. It's very similar to buffalo berry, which does grow here. Naturally, and then they pick the berries off the branches. So it should cost about $1 million a bag, but it doesn't. Super high in vitamin C taste. I call it the prairie creamsicle. And buffalo berry has similar flavors, but of course it's bright red, and it has a compound in it that helps you keep on fat. So traditionally that would have been harvested after the frost, and people would place blankets under the tree and then just kind of shake, and the berries would come down. So elders who had trouble keeping weight on, people with immunocompromised diseases, people don't really like it when you tell them, hey, this will help you keep your fat. But when you think of surviving and thriving in winter, that was a very important berry. And it would grow in Calgary. Yes, yes, I've actually seen it growing on the boulevards. Okay.
I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I will ask one of my own. Have you ever made a recipe book or anything like that? Like,
I did make a little recipe book. I had it all on my laptop, and then I finished one of those competitions, was so tired I forgot to lock my car, and my laptop was stolen, and I hadn't saved it. So I bought a 1949 typewriter and typed all the recipes out and literally cut and pasted. So I have a few of those left, and funny story. My son said, "Oh, Tom Hanks, the actor, likes typewriters. You should send one to him." So I found his address, mailed it to him, and he typed me back a letter thanking me for the cookbook. So yes, I do have a cookbook, but it's just a very homemade one.
Still,
ICANN is actually planning to do a cookbook in the future. We hope to have that out by Christmas. So then you'd get chefs from all over Canada.
All right, I will keep my eye out for that. Natalie, did you have any questions? Natalie or Natalie?
Yeah, like maybe Natalie Pepin may have a question.
I do have a question, actually. Thank you, Jenni. Oh my goodness, how amazing. All those photos are gorgeous. I'm curious, of all the ingredients you've cooked with, what was the most challenging to either learn to cook with or to incorporate into a dish, and what was your favorite?
Well, my favorite is choke cherries because I grew up eating choke cherries. Of course, you know, or maybe you don't, but I'm sure you do, Natalie, that when you grind the choke cherry seeds, it becomes that beautiful, glorious dish that is served at feasts and spread on bannock. So I grew up having that, but kind of in jam form. So to me, choke cherries hold a special place in my heart because they remind me of my aunts and my grandma. And the most difficult thing to cook with was bison liver, partly because I understand how important it is and I didn't want to mess it up. And also because if you cook it to too high a temperature, you're actually destroying the nutrients. So you want to cook it so it's food safe, but you don't want to overcook it. So bison liver has to be probably the most challenging ones, but also one of the most delicious.
Is there other ingredients you would like to be able to use, but you haven't used yet?
Yeah, I would love to be able to use moose because moose meat is, I grew up eating that in the north and I absolutely love it. But currently we're not able to serve moose in a commercial way. In Newfoundland, restaurants can serve it. So maybe I need to open a restaurant there. But again, I don't know when or how. There's talk of a mobile abattoir where you know, the testing could happen right on site, so people could have restaurants where that, you know, instead of taking, how are you going to take a moose to an abattoir to have the head tested? There's all that, you know, logistics. We're so far apart geographically here in Saskatchewan. So if that happens, I would love to be able to cook with moose. I can cook with it for groups that hire me that are in Indigenous communities, but other than that, I can't. So yeah, moose is on one of the top things on my list. And there are chefs who are, I don't know if you've heard of Rich Francis, but he's been doing some great work in, you know, food sovereignty and basically just doing it. But you know, he always runs the risk of getting fined or arrested. So, and doesn't that sound shocking, fined or arrested for serving traditional cuisine? But it's the reality.
Exactly.
Right now. Yeah.
So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and also lobbying to government.
Yeah, and that's part of what ICANN is doing. Is where our stated goal at the last time we met is to kind of pick up where we left off before the pandemic in terms of lobbying.
Yeah. So, like, how do you do it? Like, do you get the chefs together and then you talk to governments, or like, do you use other means to get the message? You know?
I think there's a few different things. I think we can lobby. I think one thing to do too is there are ways of serving it. If you have a ticketed event where people are buying a ticket to the event, but you're not technically selling the food. So I think what would be a smart idea is invite some of these players like CFIA, some politicians to one of these dinners and say, look, this is the food, this is how we're making it. Once they've eaten it and once they have a bird's eye view into it, I think they might be more likely to help it along. Because I think as Métis people, we're often the bridge, aren't we? Between, you know, brokering some relationships and you know, making things happen kind of in a good way. So I'm hoping that we can do that and not with too much delay. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm confident that it will happen. And then it'll be up to every chef and every operator too to, you know, do things in a responsible and consistent way too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, and also like for showing us some of the dishes, and also like what you do in like going into nature in order to harvest berries and other plants. So thank you so much. And thank you also to Natalie. So thank you both. I hope everybody enjoyed this special series on food sovereignty, which I think is extremely important and should be discussed more and more. And we hear a little bit more about it, but I think to focus it on Métis food sovereignty is especially important. So thank you all. Thank you for being here with us. And also thank you to our moderators, Amanda and Julia. So have a good day. Goodbye.